I'm curious to know. I don't know that I've ever heard your Monroe story. How did you come to Monroe?
Aha. Well, I was first introduced to Monroe probably in the 70s with one of those cassette tape packages, and I tracked it for years. And then I joined DOPS in Charlottesville around 2010 or so. And we were starting to do some collaboration at that point. And as part of that, I took a gateway right around that time. And fantastic experience. Really enjoyed it. Had a what I would call a veridical out of body excursion. So we were running the out of body exercise, and I've had pretty intense out of body experiences launched from dreams, but never had really done it sort of intentionally. Um, so I felt like I kind of went out and I drifted down the hall in the Nancy Penn Center and reached a door at the end of the other side of the building. Had never been through that door before. Kind of drifted through the door and saw what looked like a series of metal bands kind of going up in a pattern. I had no idea what that was. And afterwards, I went down the hall and opened the door, and there are those steps up to the top of the tower, and each step has a metal band on it going right up in the pattern I saw. So it wasn't a totally clear image, and I didn't feel exactly the same way as being launched out of a dream, but there it was, a veridical piece of evidence, and I thought that was pretty fantastic. And also in that gateway, Joe Gallenberger was one of the trainers, and at that time I was working on designing and building PK sensors for the DOPS study at UVA, and just happened. I had no idea that Joe was running MC squared or anything like that. I happened to mention to Joe what I was doing. He said, "Oh, working on PK sensors, are you? Well, come over and join us at MC squared." And that launched a whole series that goes on to this day, Wednesday evenings at MC squared with PK sensors. So that's kind of what got me launched.
Very
And
cool.
then, yeah, a couple of years ago, Scooter was looking around for somebody to do some research, and we got going on the brain study with Sam, and that got me into a 1 day a week research position at Monroe, which has just been fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, and we're
I'd,
very happy to have you.
I'd like to share my anecdote of working with you as your crash test dummy. I know you don't like me calling that, but I was doing, for those of you who haven't heard this story yet, I was doing some of the studies with Ross for the EEG experiment and going and getting the skull cap put on. And I happened to do this one day while I was in the lucid dreaming um, program. And in the booth, you had me sitting there with a book, no glasses, which made it hard to read, and pumping 3 seconds of Sam Hemisync, alternating 3 hertz, 30 hertz, whatever at my brain, and seeing what my brain was doing during this. And as I've mentioned, the first one of those puts me into focus 10. But so I'm sitting there with my book and I'm trying to read my book, and suddenly I'm thinking, that chart is sliding off the page. How very strange. Just a minute. The chart can't slide off the page. I'm having a lucid dream. Wahoo! And I told Ross just about where this happened in the timing for the whole thing, and he was able to find the peak in my printout. So I have EEG proof of an interesting lucid dream of sliding charts. And charts generally don't slide off the page in a novel anyway.
Yeah, there was a real identifiable EEG pattern that we found it. It was pretty cool. And I have to say, yes, Susan, that's one of her alternative volunteer jobs. She was, well, I call them lab rats. She's the crash. She calls it the crash test dummy. But I put her through some pretty obnoxious testing, trying to get that EEG system running and the protocol running, and she was just great. She put up with it all.
That's great. So Ross, were you here? Were you here during the days of Bob? I guess you would have been, right?
I never actually met Bob.
Never
I
met Bob. Okay, interesting.
no,
I was going to
yeah,
ask you if you had a favorite Bob story.
no. He had moved on by the time I got there.
Got it.
So I have to say though, the medium we brought down from DOPS to RMR, the Copperwell Room, was surely picking up on all kinds of Monroe family uh,
Wow. And
that are.
when was that? Was that recently?
That was the summer before last, and he was describing, you know, sounded like Bob. It sounded like Bob's wife. So they're still there watching over the place. Presence.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard some interesting stories from some of the staff that are there on site. Just interesting things happening, kind of especially with electronic equipment and computers behaving strangely. So it seems there may be some energy still there.
There's
Check it.
energy. There is definitely energy there, and strange stories about computers and electronics vis-a-vis energy. I've got a few of those. Won't go into them now, but and from encounters with Monroe participants as well.
We have
So,
time for a story.
got time for
Okay.
one story? All right.
Oh, yes.
So this is regarding a healer. Um, she was at MC squared and really showed that she could affect the sensors at MC squared. Really quite spectacular. And then came back a couple of years later for some more Monroe programs and came over to the lab one afternoon and we sat down and talked at length for a good hour in which she went into detail describing to me her practice. She's like a clinical psychologist, something like that, has a practice um, and does healing with her clients. So she described that whole sequence to me. And I think in the process of doing that, maybe started doing it because I started feeling that kind of energy effect. I have felt it with other healers before. I got other stories like that, but I've learned how to recognize this. And so we got done, and she left, and I was working on a computer in the lab. Went over back to what I was doing and simply touched a metal connector on that computer, which was a grounded connector. It was a sort of damp day. There was no static spark or anything like that. But that computer gave up the ghost immediately the second I touched it. There wasn't a massive burnout like the computer that got hit by lightning up at RMR this summer. I couldn't see any physical effect, but the motherboard was gone, gonzo, just like that. So it's events like that that are telling me there is something real with subtle energy, despite what people want to say that that's a placebo or what. I know there is something going on with it. And I've got other stories just like that. There's a physical phenomenon here with subtle energy and healing.
Well, you've written lots of articles about the copper wall for us. Maybe it's time for you to write one about some of your anecdotes.
I got a few. They've
Got a few?
accumulated over the years doing parapsychology research as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the kind of stuff that seldom makes it into the published papers, but you accumulate enough of those over time, and it's like for example, metal bending. If you see or experience really good cases of metal bending, it really provides the confidence, I think, going forward to study that because that's a really anomalous event. What can make metal turn into taffy? And I have felt that, I've experienced that, and I've seen the most fantastic creations at MC squared with thick, heavy metal, cannot be physically bent. Um, and I've also compared a metal bent paranormally in my experience of it and taking the same type of metal and trying to bend that physically and just have it snap at 45 degrees, not turn into two complete spirals, as if that metal was just, and that's what I felt, it turned into taffy for about 2 seconds. Now, why is that going on? Let's find out.
Yeah.